Hello, everyone. My name is Laura. I am here to welcome you to the webinar, 5 Ways to Revive Your Relationship with Food. I'm so happy you could take a little time today for yourself and get a little health information that I know you will find useful. We're excited to have Solera's very own Michelle Marshall joining us today as our speaker. She is going to introduce herself because she can do it much better than I, but I will turn it over to you now, Michelle.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura, and welcome everyone to this afternoon's webinar. I'm thrilled to be both a part of Solera and a registered dietitian nutritionist by training. I have had the privilege of working in a variety of settings through my nutrition career, both in the public health and policy setting, but also individually and providing individual counseling to people and their families. So it's a pleasure to be able to take a step back from my day-to-day job at Solera and think about the patterns and the opportunities that I think we have to help support one another in our culture and really recapturing our ability to have a positive relationship with food and what we eat. So before we get started, we'll have a little bit of audience participation. If you all can take a look at the slide, there's a simple question, and the statement is, choose a word that best describes how you feel after you eat a quote-unquote healthy meal. And the caveat here is don't think too much about what healthy means, but just answer honestly and quickly, how do you feel after you feel like you've had a healthy meal? So the top word is satisfied. Interestingly enough, followed quickly right after with hungry. And I think equally as compelling is I've never actually thought about it. And the next question is, how do you feel, or what's the word that comes to mind after you eat an unhealthy meal? So same caveat, don't think too hard about what unhealthy means, but just the feeling that you have after you've consumed what you've been told is an unhealthy meal. So guilty seems to be the winner of this poll, which is very consistent. And again, a few folks who have never thought about it, some people coming in the chat box with their own answers, too full. Wonderful. So the whole point of that exercise is just to know that you are not alone. Food, as much as we try to minimize it to its caloric content or macronutrient composition, is so much more than just nutrition. It's emotional, it's personal, and there are certain foods that trigger emotional responses. And whether it be stressed or satisfied or guilty, what we'll talk about are ways not about changing the food you eat, but about observing those patterns and that mindset to help give you a little bit more resilience to bring some consistency and some happiness to your relationship and how you're thinking and approaching the way that you eat. In addition to the emotional and often charged responses we have to food, there's also a very consistent pattern that I hear from people both in personally and professionally, that there is just a lot of confusion about what to eat. And that confusion and that perception of conflicting information is a point of stress for people, and often also contributes to the emotional responses that we have when we eat either quote unquote healthy or unhealthy foods. And I point this out because it's often that we feel very alone when we're having those emotional responses. And I'm here to tell you, you are not. And these are very normal things. These are very normal experiences and things that we often can't control. And so what I'm hoping we focus on today are the things that we actually can. The other thing that I'd like to point out is that in the United States, when it comes to food, we can often be described as the land of fad diets, of weight loss reality shows, of foods that are demonized, of foods that are glorified. We have dozens, if not more, of celebrities who offer nutrition advice through social media. And we have all of these things happening in our environment that can compound our reactions and the way that we think about food and what we're eating. And so if you are having negative experiences with food and with diets and with the way that you are perceiving the way that you're eating, again, you are not alone, and there's a lot of things not working in your favor. And so again, what we'll be focusing on today are the things that are much more in your control than you might be aware of. So today, in our short time together, what I hope you will leave with is a few tools to learn how to better observe your responses to food and eating, a few simple techniques to begin to shift your mindset and food-related habits, and if nothing else, just a little bit of a belief that there is a future in which a happy, healthy relationship with food is possible and actually quite powerful. So I'm going to run through 5 tips, and we won't have the chance to get into great detail, but hopefully they'll be simple enough that you'll remember them when you leave today. So the first is all about observation. Many of you noted in the initial poll that you had never thought about the way that you feel after a meal. Many of you also noted that there was a strong emotional reaction to what you ate, whether it be guilty or happy and satisfied. And so for the next 5 days, my challenge to you is to simply observe your eating patterns. Take note of things like when you eat, how you eat. Are you standing? Are you in the car? Are you at the table? Are you by yourself? There's a strong correlation with the people around us and our emotional experience and relationship to what we're eating. And oftentimes we're moving so quickly in our day-to-day that we don't stop and think about how those things actually contribute greatly to how we feel about ourselves and about what we're putting into our bodies. And so the whole point is not to judge or to put a label on what you might be observing in your day-to-day habits, but just to simply take note. Because it's these patterns that can start to bring some awareness to things that might be triggers that you had not even thought about happening in your day-to-day life. So again, the questions are, when are you eating? How are you eating? Where are you eating? And who are you eating with? And then just ask yourself, how does that make you feel? Are there moments when you're eating by yourself that the feelings of guiltiness are coming up more than when you're with your girlfriends or with your kids or with your family? The second tip, which I often hear is much easier said than done, is to let go of the diet mentality. One of the things that I have advised folks on doing first is to just simply have a moment of reflection, to think back and take inventory of all of the diets that you've tried, and to try to remember how you felt both before and after that diet. And ask yourself, was it worth it? And if you had the chance, would you do it again? And perhaps most liberating in this particular tip is to take a moment to imagine yourself not on a diet. What would that look like? What kinds of feelings would be going through your head? Are you already giving yourself a hard time because you don't believe you have the self-discipline to not be on a diet? And the whole point here is to understand that the way we eat is all about patterns, and it's all about self-compassion. And it's not to be a free-for-all that, just go out and go crazy, but there is a freedom, and there is something to letting go of the feeling that there always has to be a diet involved if you're going to live a healthy life. And so the tip here is also to practice some self-compassion, that what you've done in the past doesn't necessarily dictate what you have to do in the future. Tip number 3 is all about making peace with your food. And this ties back to those emotional reactions that we all have experienced and we all do experience. And the tip here is to be a bit more like Switzerland and to practice neutrality when it comes to food. Every day I catch myself thinking about a food as good or bad, and it's still a practice for me. And so I challenge you to think about the language and the words that come in your head and try to reframe things that have become so natural for you. One of these is here. how many people have experienced and said to themselves or to their girlfriends or to their spouses and significant others, I really shouldn't be eating this piece of chocolate cake? What about a reframe and thinking and saying, I am choosing to eat and enjoy this piece of chocolate cake? And again, this isn't meant to be a, time to go wild and eat whatever's in front of you, but there is power in your mindset and power in your language as you think about the food that you're eating. Tip number 3, honor your hunger. We often use the clock, our breaks from work, our kids getting out of school, people coming home, the time of the day as our cue to eat. And the opportunity we have is to really try to tune in to your body's cues as a way to determine when and how much you eat. There's also power in taking the time to pause while you're eating to just assess, how is the food tasting? Are you full? Can you stop? Time is, I have 2 young children, and time is not always our friend, but it's important to take these moments to just assess and tune in to how your body is responding to the food that you're choosing to put into it. One of the other thing that is pretty consistent with people's experiences with food is that we often eat for many reasons outside of actually being hungry. And so one of the things that we can start to do is start to think about the other ways that we can comfort and nurture our needs without using food. So that might mean that instead of getting together for wine and cheese with your friends or family, that you choose to go on a walk. And a reminder that as much as food is much more powerful than just nutrition and calories, it actually won't fix our feelings in the long run. And so this is a challenge to think about all of the things that are available to us, whether that be being able to go on a walk or to participate in an activity that doesn't necessarily center around food and beverages, as a way to provide comfort and to feed our other needs without necessarily thinking they all have to be fed with food and nutrition. The last tip here is about consistency. The goal here is not perfection, it's consistency. And the reality is no one has a perfect diet, and you don't have to have a perfect diet and a way of eating to be healthy and to nourish your health and body and mind. The good news is one snack isn't going to cause 10 pounds of weight gain, or isn't going to set you on a trajectory of poor eating habits. It's really about consistency and patterns and the things that start to become daily that matter. And so if we can start to tune in to the food that not only honors your health, but also your taste buds and makes you feel well, both mentally and physically, we can really start to see improvements in not only how we feel and our health, but in our mindset, which is oftentimes one of the most powerful things that we have and often have control over, even if it feels like we don't. Much more than being able to stick to a diet. If we can stick to keeping our minds healthy and the way we approach food, we are going to all be much better off in our health goals, and not just for the duration of a diet, but for a lifetime. So just to quickly recap, the 5 tips we talked about today are: number 1, just observe. If you've never thought about the way that you feel before or after a meal, start to pay attention. If you've never thought about the things that are triggering certain choices over others, whether that be people or places or time of day, start to notice. Number 2 is let go of the diet mentality. And we do that by just thinking back to all the times that we've been on a diet and thinking to ourselves, how did that go? And would I do that again? And number 3, making peace with your food. Contrary to what we hear oftentimes in the headlines, food is not the enemy. It can truly be our friend It's an essential part of life. It's not going anywhere. And so what can we do to just shift some of the language and the triggers that come up that often put a negative connotation about the food that we eat in our minds? Tip number 4 is honor your hunger, not just your physical hunger to eat, but the other needs that you have in your lives that might be better met through non-nutrition and non-food responses. And tip number 5 is be consistent, not perfect. You're not alone, and perfection is not the goal, but consistency is certainly the tool that's going to change habits and mindsets and lead to you having a healthy, positive, and powerful relationship with food, which, as the quote says here on the right, is much healthier than any amount of kale that you can consume. I have just a few resources, both that help to inform these tips today, but also that you can explore for yourself. As I mentioned, for those who have children and other people that you're caring for in your life, these patterns aren't necessarily just for you, but also about the modeling that you do for the other people in your life. And the way that we behave, the language that we use matters, not just for ourselves, but the people around us. And this is these can be really helpful exercises to think about for your entire household. And I encourage you to look at the other information and resources available through these links here.
Well, thanks, Michelle. I wanted to share one last tip, which is that you can also get in a program. And so it's also often helpful when you're making lifestyle changes to have, an expert resource and group support. So there are lifestyle change programs that are often included with health plans. And so that is, where Solera comes in. We do have relationships with health plans, and we connect those members to lifestyle change programs like a diabetes prevention program. And so that kind of program is something that's available to you for a full year. You start with 16 weekly group sessions, and then you move into monthly maintenance sessions for the rest of the year. And it's really a CDC recognized program. And really, it's trying to help you lose weight so that you can reduce your risk of developing type 2 diabetes, which is becoming quite prevalent today. Those programs also will have access to a health coach. As I mentioned, you'll have some lessons on nutritional guidance and how to incorporate more activity into your life. You'll have a small group for support. And you also can join a program that's online or in person, like a Weight Watchers. And so if you're in an online program, you'll get a wireless scale. And then everyone receives the Fitbit if they participate for 4 weeks. You get a Fitbit, which helps with motivation and just tracking your activity. So if you haven't already participated in a program through Solera or haven't heard about it through your health plan or your employer, you can visit soleraforme.com/webinar to see if you qualify. So you have to qualify and have the right insurance. So qualification means that you're at risk of diabetes, and things like weight and family history and ethnicity will drive whether you qualify or not. So I want to thank Michelle again for sharing this valuable information, and thank you to everyone who attended for taking that time. We do have a couple minutes for questions, and I know I had one, Michelle, in that I'm finding as I get older, I'm having like the sugar, I call them the sugar shakes, where I get really weak all of a sudden and feel like I have to shove my mouth full of any food that might provide some nutritional value so I don't pass out, if you will. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening there and what you would recommend?
Absolutely. Thank you, Laura. I don't think this is actually uncommon. I think this actually ties in really nicely to a couple of things we talked about. The first is honoring your hunger. And there are likely earlier cues before you felt lightheaded that were telling you your body needed some nourishment. And the other piece of this is when we wait that long, sometimes we are leading ourselves to a point of eating whatever is in front of us. And I think this is, again, a consistent pattern that is observed in folks and experience. And I think to avoid that moment of which you're so desperate just to keep your blood sugar up, you're eating anything in front of you, it really does require us to tune in to our body's cues earlier and to think about the things that if we have to get our blood sugar up, what's a way to do that in a way that not only is just a spike in sugar, but is something that also provides added fiber and nutrients. So in this case, instead of going for that, quick soda fix or piece of candy, that's certainly to get your blood sugar up, adding in a whole piece of fruit with some protein is going to make sure your body can respond positively, but also last much longer.
That sounds great. I will do that. There was another question I have heard a lot about lately, which is artificial sweeteners and how, does your body really react to that like regular sugar or, are you doing, because I feel better and I feel less guilty if I drink a Diet Coke, for example, instead of a regular Coke, but am I really doing myself any favors?
I think it depends what you're looking to do. So artificial sweeteners certainly have a place in people's diets, if that's what they choose. It's certainly not an essential food group, but where they help is, for those who are really looking to limit the amount in grams of sugar consumed, but still have the desire to have, whether it be caffeine or just a sweet fix. I think artificial sweeteners certainly have a place and allow you to keep the calorie content down. I think like anything, there's moderation is really critical. And it's not absorbed the same way that sugar is, so it won't spike your blood sugar. And so if you are looking for something for stabilizing when it comes to keeping your blood sugar levels even, that won't do it, but it can oftentimes just quench that need to have a caffeine boost or a sugar boost. So it's certainly not a never, but I definitely think it's something to be mindful of and of course keep in moderation in your diet.
Great. I do love moderation is key. We did have a question come in off the line. I love coffee in a variety of liquid coffee creamer. What are some ideas to still enjoy this but not going overboard?
I have your coffee, and I think what I notice more when you put a specific food item in a box of never, 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 you end up having about 10 things that aren't that, and it doesn't ever hit the spot. So I encourage you to have your first cup of coffee with your creamer that you like, and then maybe try a little bit less, for your next couple of cups. I am a firm believer in, to the extent that you can eat whole, real foods, the better. And so I am, I would encourage you to also look at real cream as a substitute and see how you respond. But I certainly think that ensuring that those foods are not in a never box will help from a mindset just shift to make it not be that kind of forbidden fruit pattern that we often get into.
Yeah, we had someone in the chat suggest coconut milk and pure vanilla, which sounds yummy.
Yeah, absolutely.
We had another question about intermittent fasting and your opinion of that, since it's very popular lately, which is, staying hungry for 16 hours and only eating during 8 hours of the day.
Yeah, this is a really interesting evolving body of science, and it's not new. I think that's important to know. It's newly caught on, I think, in mainstream culture, but it's not a new way of thinking about the body. Just like anything, I think I would proceed with caution because everybody is going to respond very differently to these tightly structured times of eating. So I talked earlier about that diet mentality and not letting the clock dictate when and how you eat. And I think this obviously runs contrary to that. I would, if this was an area that you were interested in pursuing, I would certainly seek the guidance of a registered dietitian or even your primary care physician. It does work for some people. That is for sure. And there's something to kind of allowing your gut to relax and not have to be constantly working that I think has showing some really powerful evidence. But again, it's not for everybody, and you do have to be really, really careful. And I think particularly if you are someone who is living with diabetes or another chronic condition, these are things that can't be taken lightly. And so I think it's worth reading and talking to your providers about, but I certainly wouldn't just go into it blindly.
No jumping on the bandwagon. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for the questions, and again for joining, and congratulate yourself for taking a little time to learn something and think about your health. And we hope this helps you have a healthy relationship with food moving forward. So have a great rest of your day, and thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.